Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my weekly live Q&A, episode 44. My name is Danny Segura. I am a mixed martial arts reporter for MMAJunkie.com. And yes, like I said, welcome to my weekly live Q&A. You guys already know the deal. So in this video, I basically answer all your questions regarding the combat sports world and more. First, I answer your Twitter questions, obviously submitted prior to going live here, and then I take things over to the YouTube live chat to answer your questions. Whatever it is that's on your mind, I'll answer it. Just throw it on the YouTube live chat, and I'll get to it in the later part of this video. Sounds good? Like always, remember, thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel, share it. I'll retweet you, give you some love. And yeah, that's about it. Those are the main rules of this thing, right? So let's get things started. Very busy week in mixed martial arts. Obviously, we're coming off UFC 256. It was an event that, to be honest, going into it, I had a lot of interest going into it, but for other reasons. Obviously, as you guys know, with my work over at MMA Junkie, I've been focusing a lot more today on creating content in Spanish and catering to that audience and sort of that market, right? The Hispanic and Latin American market. So obviously with Brandon Moreno fighting for a belt, it was a big deal, right? For Latin America, for Mexico. First Mexican to challenge for a UFC title, first Mexican to headline a UFC pay-per-view as well. So it was a big moment. But I know maybe for the Americans, for the Europeans and others, maybe it didn't feel like the biggest pay-per-view in the world. And also, it kind of just felt like we saw a little bit of that variation, just a few weeks back. In fact, 3 weeks back with UFC 255. Obviously, Deiveson defending his belt against Alex Perez and Moreno defeating Brandon Royval, right? So I get it. Now, there was a few other gems there, but again, it wasn't the best card. But I think once it came down to it, and it came down to the action, we saw very good fights, very competitive fights as well, and some great finishes. So all in all, I think it was one of the best cards of the year. If you factor in that, it did have some star power, right? And also the way the actual fight card went down, I think easily, probably, most likely, the best fight card of the year. But again, I was looking at like some of the stuff that happened earlier in the year, and that shit just seems like so long ago. It just seems like it was like 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, this is I guess effects of the pandemic and the world going to shit, basically. But anyway, so we got that going on. Obviously, Bellator had a huge signing and picking up free agent Yoel Romero. That was pretty big. I wrote a feature, an opinion column about it on MMAJunkie.com, as well as addressed the signing on Spinning Backclick as well, which came out this morning on MMAJunkie.com as well. I invite you guys to check that out after this live Q&A is over. But anyways, like I said, tons to talk about, and we got tons of questions as well. So let's get right into it. I know there was a bit of a time change and the schedule's been kind of messed up, but my schedule's been moving a lot lately, so haven't been able to stick to the 10:30 a.m. mark on Tuesdays. But it is Tuesday, right? So that's good. At least I got the day right this time. So let's get into it, shall we? We got plenty of questions. First question is by Parzival. And he wants to know, this is a two-part question, a very odd one. And he wants to know, or she, I don't know. Is Francis Ngannou the biggest threat to a champion? And then completely different question. Or a draw at 125, do you see contenders there, or even 135 as some more, or a challenge to the champ? So Francis Ngannou totally is a threat to Stipe Miocic, no doubt about that. As far as the draw that we saw at 125, obviously over the weekend we saw Deiveson Figueiredo fight to a draw against Brandon Moreno. It was one of the best fights I've ever seen. Let's just put it like that. It was easily one of the best fights we've ever seen. I mean, I've been covering the sport now professionally for 5 years, like making a living out of this. And yeah, it was by far one of the best fights I've ever seen. It's up there. It's up there. It all, like, you knew as soon as that fight was going down, it was becoming a legendary fight. It's becoming a legendary moment in mixed martial arts, and a historic moment. I mean, historically, I think it was a very, very important fight. And as we look back on it, especially as more develops from it, because at one point we're going to see a rematch between the two. It's going to be historic. It's going to be historic. That's what it feels like. Easily the best fight we've ever seen at 125 pounds by far. It was a high caliber fight, obviously a title fight, and on top of that, it was very exciting, back and forth. They had so many layers, the fight. That's what it was so exciting. Just when you thought like things were figured out and you saw a winner sort of going a certain direction, right, going upwards, the tides just kept changing, and that was very beautiful to watch. That was very exciting. But yes, it ended in a majority draw. I scored it 47-47 for obviously a drop. I thought overall Figueiredo won. I thought he took the first, third, and also the fifth round. However, that 1 point deduction in the third round obviously is what pushed this fight to become a drop. But yeah, I think that's the fight to make. I think maybe there are a few other interesting names that are coming up. Obviously, Askarov, he's looked good. He also has a draw with Brandon Moreno. And, for example, Brandon Royval, I know he's coming off a loss, but, he fights often. I'm sure he'll get back on the horse and pick up a few wins. But other than that, there's not that many interesting contenders beyond that. So I think the rematch makes sense, not only because it's deserved, and after that type of fight, like, you have to do an immediate rematch, but also because, there's not that many contenders. I feel like Askarov could use a win. And then, Alex Perez obviously coming off a loss against the champion. Pantoja needs some work as well. Joseph Benavidez is fighting Askarov, so that's going to solve something. But even Benavidez had some pretty bad defeats against the champion. So I think all in all, unless something extremely crazy happens where, let's say Henry Cejudo decides to come back and let's say somehow he can make 125 pounds, which I doubt it, then I wouldn't necessarily agree with it. I'm not saying that's what should happen. I still think the rematch between Moreno and Figueiredo should happen regardless of whatever. But I can see the UFC potentially skipping that for that type of fight, right? But other than that, I mean, I don't really think Cody Garbrandt has much of a say, especially with his inactivity, all the injuries and stuff and issues that he's had. I don't think he has a say, even if he were to be healthy and be like, I'm coming down to 125 pounds. I don't think he gets it done. Again, it would have to be like Cejudo, like the former champion or something like that, something big, for Brandon Moreno to maybe get a little bit of fear of potentially missing out on that immediate rematch. Other than that, I think it's pretty much booked. I mean, even Dana White said it. You have to do the immediate rematch. So yeah, I think that's what's going to go down next at 125 pounds. Hopefully they give a good break to these guys and we see them maybe towards the end of the first quarter of 2021, in a few months, maybe 3 months, something like that. I think that would make sense. If not early second quarter, but definitely give those guys a break for sure. All right, question number 2. The Executioner 91 wants to know, although Tony didn't look like himself, I do feel the Bronx for some years now has had the skills to stop anyone. In your opinion, did the fight show more about Tony's decline or Oliveira's rise? Maybe both? Yeah, this is a very, very good question. One that I've actually been asking myself for the last couple of days since that event took place. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a mixture of both. That's for sure. I don't have any doubt about that. But what I'm trying to figure out is exactly is we know it's a mixture of both, but what I'm trying to figure out is the percentage. If it's a 50-50, 40-60, whatever it is. But certainly a mixture of both. I think that for some time, I agree with you, Oliveira has looked like a killer. I mean, the guy is on a crazy win streak. It seemed he's fighting a lot smarter now. It seemed, that experience is just weighing in a lot more. Remember, he started his journey in the UFC when he was just 21. In fact, he had the goal of becoming the youngest champion in the UFC. Obviously, break that John Jones record at 23 years old. So I always hate when you hear Macy Barber or Edmund Shabazian or all these young kids going I want to be the youngest UFC champion. You do know that you don't get paid extra for being the youngest UFC champion. You don't get anything. You don't even get put in the Hall of Fame. Not even, maybe you'll get the record somewhere in fight metrics and Wikipedia as the youngest UFC champion. But other than that, like, it really doesn't do anything to you being the youngest UFC champion. I mean, it sounds nice, but I think it's more important to get there right and do things right rather than trying to rush something, especially something so important as your career. And I feel like Charles Oliveira had the same thing. He was determined to become the youngest UFC champion, and within that process, he took some fights that maybe he wasn't ready for, suffered some bad losses that on the long run it kind of hindered his process, or maybe didn't hinder it, but certainly pushed him back, right? At the time, there was some fights, like, for example, look, the problem with him is that he did look very good early on. I mean, he jumps in the UFC, and in his first fight, he submits Darren Elkins. I believe at the time that probably had to be Elkins' first submission loss. Yes, first submission loss. That guy's very hard to submit. Very few fighters have been able to do that. So Charles Oliveira becomes the first man to submit the gritty and tough Darren Elkins. That was his UFC debut. Then he fights Efrain Escudero, very, very good guy. Remember, I believe he won the Ultimate Fighter. Just a solid fighter. He's had his up and downs, especially with the weight, but all in all, very good fighter. Beats him. And then they put him against Jim Miller at the time, 2010, 10 years ago. Dude, Jim Miller was a killer. Let's look at his record real quick. Jim Miller, at the time, he defeated Charles Oliveira. Dude, he was on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fight win streak. And then prior to that, he was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. He was 13-1 in his last 14 bouts. And then they feed him against Charles Oliveira. So obviously, Jim Miller being a top contender. And he was coming off wins against Gleison Tibau, who was a complete monster at 155 for so long. Mark Bocek, the Canadian. Dwayne Ludwig. Mac Danzig, another veteran. I mean, those were good wins. Matt Weinman. So yeah, that was a big jump, and of course he loses that fight and gets actually submitted, Charles Oliveira. And then from then on, he was always trying to recapture that, and then he just had a bunch of tough fights. He had that no contest with Nick Lentz, then fights Donald Cerrone, who's an absolute beast, messes him up pretty bad. I believe he broke his orbital bone in that fight. Picks up another 2 wins, then fights Cub Swanson, then fights Frankie Edgar. You know what I'm saying? Like, at that point in time, you're just, 22, 23 years old, and you're fighting Frankie Edgar in 2013. You're fighting Cub Swanson in 2012. You're fighting Donald Cerrone in 2011, Jim Miller in 2010. Those are fights you shouldn't be taking. So anyways, over time, he just stuck around, picked up some good wins, and eventually figured things out till this point where we see in 2020, 10 years later, a decade into fighting in the UFC. And now he's on an 8-fight win streak and defeated, Tony Ferguson on Saturday. And then prior to that, Kevin Lee, who's obviously very good. So, yeah, it's really a maturation process that's been in the works for so many years. And Charles Oliveira for sure is a force to be reckoned with at 155 pounds. I like his chances against a lot of guys, and you can't discard him against any matchup. I mean, anybody that you put him in against, maybe like a, I don't know, let's say a Justin Gaethje, right? Like, I'd probably pick Justin Gaethje, right? But we saw what Khabib did to Gaethje. I would say that Oliveira has better jiu-jitsu than Khabib. And, I mean, we saw what Khabib did to Gaethje, and obviously Oliveira has better, at least from a pure jiu-jitsu standpoint, better jiu-jitsu than Khabib. And, we've seen him submit guys like Kevin Lee and others. You never know. You'd probably catch Gaethje. I think there's definitely a solid chance there. So, and then you compare him against other top lightweights. You definitely get the sense that, he's game. So, for sure, Charles Oliveira is a contender, a title contender at this point in time. And from his Kevin Lee bout to this bout with Tony Ferguson, he's improved a lot. And we saw that. But at the same time, to address your question, we also saw a decline in Tony Ferguson. And for some time now, I've kind of been expecting this. He's had some pretty intense wars, some pretty intense bouts. And he's been getting older. Obviously, he's 36, turns 37 in February. So you're just kind of watching all the time, like, is this it? Is this it? But at the same time, Tony Ferguson is a different breed. And he has a reputation that he doesn't abide by the regular rules of mixed martial arts. Like the guy just keeps getting older and just keeps getting more and more savage, right? The guy has crazy injuries in a later stage of his career, mid-30s, blows out his knee, and yet he comes back and has, some of the best performances we've ever seen. So you've always wondered, like, when was that time? And I think that time is now. He looked old, man. He looked old. Obviously, I think he's still a top lightweight. I think he's still a top 5, but that top 3, that's going to get very tough for him. So we'll see. We've also seen some guys had pretty bad losses and then bounce back quite well. Even Gaethje, who gave him a pretty bad beating, had those compiled defeats against Poirier. Who was the other guy? Eddie Alvarez, and was there one more? Was there a third loss? And he's also, he's 32, obviously a lot younger. But he had that Poirier and Dustin Poirier. The Poirier and Alvarez losses, which were obviously fight at night, but he took a pretty bad beating. And since then, he bounced back and became a title challenger. So you never know. You never know. But again, at 36 years of age, with a lot of mileage on his body, you do wonder if this really was the turning point for Tony Ferguson. Part of me thinks it is. And, I think that the fan in me is kind of in denial. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because of that, because I'm a huge Tony Ferguson fan. But if you're using all logic, it does seem that the better days for Tony Ferguson are behind him. So it's very sad to say. And that fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov just seems pretty far gone now. I think if you would have picked up a very good, convincing win over Charles Oliveira, you go, okay, maybe there's a slight chance. Maybe. While the UFC figures things out with Khabib and Khabib figures things out in his personal life, and if he does return, maybe Tony Ferguson in the meantime can pick up another win, 2-fight win streak. Say the Justin Gaethje defeat was BS, he wasn't ready for that, whatever. You can make all the excuses in the world, and they're very valid, obviously, given the circumstances of that fight. And then maybe, just maybe, there's that one fight, that we've been waiting for so long, Khabib versus Tony. But at this point, I think we can say goodbye to that. And it sucks to say, but it's the truth, man. It's the truth. So, yeah, very, very tough situation, but it does seem like this is the end for Mr. Tony Ferguson. It sucks, but the end is, I'm talking about the end as far as being a title challenger, being that one, that top 1, top 2 slots. It just seems that's the end for him. But you never know. You never know. Stranger things have happened. A Passive Wognes wants to know, is Charles the new Tony Ferg? Crazy win streak, similar build, crazy ground game, but with smoother stand-up. Yes, they're very similar in a lot of ways. In fact, I asked that to Oliveira at Media Day. They're basically fighting a copy of each other in some sort of way. Now, nobody can actually replicate the style of Tony Ferguson. He's got his own thing going on. You can replicate maybe Charles Oliveira's, but not Tony Ferguson's. Tony Ferguson is a very, very unique guy. But if you had to pick somebody in the UFC or in MMA, forget the UFC, that comes close to Tony Ferguson's style, it's got to be Charles Oliveira. If you were to get ready for a fight, right? If you're supposed to fight Tony Ferguson and you got to bring someone in to prep you, who are you going to pick? You're going to pick Oliveira. It's a guy that has very dangerous striking, who's rangy, who's long, who uses that length quite well, who hits pretty hard still, who fights relatively at a similar pace, right? Not much slower, maybe not as faster, maybe not as high pace, but up there for sure. And at the same time, might not have the best wrestling base, but when it comes down to jiu-jitsu and positions, the guy's dangerous anywhere, right? The guy can submit you from any, at any point in time in any position. The guy's got something to work with. So yeah, you definitely pick Oliveira to bring in and help you train for a Tony Ferguson fight. So yeah, they do have very similar styles, but like I said, Ferguson is he's his own thing, in even out of the cage, they're very distinct personalities. What Ferguson brought to MMA is something that I don't think we'll ever see again. Very unique fighter from the way he saw MMA, right? Like, we're in this era where the more we progress in this timeline, right, the more we get deeper into the years, the sport just becomes a lot more professional, a lot more scientific as far as training methods, everything else. And then you see Tony Ferguson still being at the top, because it just seems like the very lower tier and middle tier are still training kind of in the old days, obviously, big groups, picking up whoever they can. And then the very elite are kind of switched to the boxing thing where everything's more specific. They bring nutritionists, obviously, because they got more resources. And then, it's just a more high-tech training, a more high-tech preparation. And then you got Tony Ferguson basically training by himself, still hitting metal poles and doing all kinds of ridiculous workouts that you would maybe see in a Rocky movie in the 80s. So yeah, I think that's lost. I don't think we'll ever see a fighter again, especially as we get deeper into the evolution of mixed martial arts, that brings that factor in of the old school grind. A guy that will literally cut weight 3 weeks, 2 weeks prior to fighting just to prove a point. I don't think we'll see that again. Tony Ferguson was his own thing, and as much as you can say maybe he's the new Tony Ferguson, I'm referring to Charles Oliveira. Maybe as far as the styles, he'll bring some of the things that Tony Ferguson brought, but all in all, Tony Ferguson is his own man, is his own thing, and nobody will ever replicate the magic that weird, awkward magic that he makes, not only inside of the cage, but outside of it. I mean, the guy's just a complete savage. So hopefully there's a second chapter to his career. I really do hope so. But like I said in the previous question, it just seems like the better days are over. But knock on wood, I think he's a great addition to the UFC's lightweight division, and I would love to see him bounce back, pick up some wins, and sort of, I don't know, get a second air into his career. And we've seen many veterans do that. In fact, in that same card, Junior Dos Santos at one point, I don't know if you guys remember, he had some pretty bad losses, and then he eventually reinvented, changed some things in the style, went on a win streak, and went on to fight for the belt again, so in a later stage of his career. Now, that's at heavyweight. It seems that story, it's seen more often at heavyweight than the lower weight classes. But again, knock on wood, hopefully that's the case. All right, question number 4, right? Yeah, 4. Again, the Executioner 91, and he wants to know, why do people say lightweight is the best division in the sport? Bantamweight also has skilled and more well-rounded fighters. I'm just wondering why the narrative keeps getting pushed. I think for a long time it was. Years ago, I remember right before I started covering the sport professionally, like, making a living out of this, and maybe I was just doing some freelance work and some stuff is more of a more from like a fan perspective. The 205 division was the golden division. There were so many big names, so many storylines, so many elite world-class fighters and great personalities. That was the best division. That era is far gone. There's a few characters that still are present from that era. Most, I would say, not thriving. Most are pretty bad losing streaks and probably should retire at this point in time. Then it kind of switched over to, like, I would say, welterweight, and then lightweight got really interesting. Obviously, the rise of Khabib, the rise of Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier as well. Conor McGregor was very responsible for that. You still had a very game Donald Cerrone at the time. You had a Bellator champion. Remember, people forget how big that was. Eddie Alvarez leaving Bellator and going to the UFC. That was huge, and obviously he went on to become a UFC champion. So that was nice as well. Who else was part of sort of that era not so long ago that really made the 155-pound division the best division in the planet? Let me see. RDA was obviously very game. That's who Eddie Alvarez took the belt from. Benson Henderson had just left the Bellator. And then you had also other interesting names. Pettis was a little bit closer to his prime back then. So, yeah, I think the narrative that we see today is still riding on that, because a lot of those names are still present. Now, they might not have the same importance and relevance in their divisions because they're older, and some have their careers and their trajectories have gone down, while some others have actually gone up, right? Or stayed about the same. Certainly Habib's has skyrocketed. skyrocketed. But all in all, like, I think people just stick to that narrative. I think for some time when those older names at 205 were no longer elite, but they still had that same name value, that still was the narrative. Like, people forget, and people just look at, the name and the history and the past, and they forget, like, okay, who is this fighter today in present time? And I think that's kind of the case at 155. But 100%, 155 is not the best division in the sport right now. Bantamweight is. Bantamweight is. I mean, if you look at, like, the rankings at 155, and this is no disrespect to any of the names that I'm about to mention, Drew Dober, can he beat the champion, Khabib Nurmagomedov? And forget Khabib, he's retired, right? Just for this exercise. Let's say, I don't know, Dustin Poirier or Conor McGregor become champions, either or, right? Because that seems to be the most logical fight to make for the belt if Khabib does indeed retire. Can Drew Dober beat Conor McGregor or Dustin Poirier? I don't think so. Gregor Gillespie, he's got that wrestling base. That's kind of interesting, but not yet. Islam Makhachev, probably not yet. Benil Dariush, he's gotten a lot better. He's gotten pretty good, but probably not yet. Kevin Lee, certainly not. Ali Quinta, nope. Diego Ferreira, nope. Paul Felder, nope. RDA, probably not. Dan Hooker, he would definitely put very tough fights against him. I mean, we saw the Poirier one over the summer, but I would still bet on McGregor or Dustin to beat him. Then number 5 is Conor, obviously, for this exercise. He's at the top. Tony Ferguson, at this point in time, I'd probably pick Dustin or McGregor to beat Ferguson. Charles Oliveira, number 3. Okay, things get interesting there, right? Justin Gaethje, number 1. Okay, things get interesting there. But you saw how building up to the top, it took a good while for you to be like, okay, maybe there's a chance that the champion could lose the belt here. At 135, if you do that exercise, bro, from 15, you start questioning things. Like, let's look at that division. Dude, can Marlo Chito Vera beat Peter Yan? I would bet my money on Peter Yan, but he's looked pretty damn good, and depending on what he does, although maybe that changes my opinion. Song Yadong, probably not. Cody Stanman would put on a good fight. Merab Devilishvili, the dude's a complete machine, complete monster. Certainly would give problems to the champion. Still favor the champion, but still, Rob Font, fantastic. Dominic Cruz, number 10. Rafael Sunsao, man, I'd pick Yan for sure. Jimmy Rivera, Jose Aldo, Pedro Munoz. I mean, it's just far more competitive. And even some guys outside of the rankings at 135 could very well, give the champion a good fight. So that's how stacked that division is. And even outside of the UFC, you look over at Bellator, that one new Russian kid that they brought that fought over last Thursday. What was it? Magomedov. He's 1-1 with Peter Yan and just making his Bellator debut and looked pretty damn good doing it. So even in other organizations, like 35 has a lot of talent everywhere. So I think that's currently the best division right now. And again, it just doesn't have the same history that lightweight has. So I think as of now, a lot of people just base things off history and they don't really look at present time. But yeah, that's why the narrative is that the best division is 155, but it's not. It's not. 135. That's where it's at. That's where it's at right now. Also, part of it is the politics of the game. This ain't just a sport. This is a much more than a sport. And at 155, you see the top guys fighting each other here and there. You know what I'm saying? Like, for the most part, the top are very inactive. It's sort of like a stalemate a little bit because a lot of people are protecting their rankings, and there's a lot of money to be made, obviously, because there's some big names. So, a lot of things to figure out and a lot of things that create, more processes in the bureaucracy of things. We're at 135, bro. Top guys are fighting each other all the time. It almost feels like every weekend there's a top fight at bantamweight, and that is amazing. That is beautiful. Now, maybe they're not making that much money, obviously, compared to the 155ers, which obviously I would love to see all the fighters make as much money as possible. I think they're underpaid, but we're just talking sport. It's pretty damn awesome that they're fighting each other constantly. So, yep, to answer your question, long rant, but you guys know me. I rant all day. All right, so we got here Darby Crash 81, also an Hablemos MMA listener. So shouts out. And he wants to know, Coker said that they weren't interested in Romero, but then a week later signs him. Was this just negotiation tactic by him to get Romero at lower salary and to force him to fight at 205? Plus, do you think maybe they changed their minds about Silva? So great question. Yes, great question. I think what's going on here is that Bellator is trying to strip away from this perception that they just take all the UFC rejects, that they really only care about big name fighters, and they don't really care about what's under the hood. As long as it looks good on the outside and, it's a popular model, they'll buy them. And I think for some time, and credit to Bellator, this is something I love about Bellator. They try things and they see if it works or not. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And, things that work are amazing and they keep doing them. And the things that that didn't work, they just strip them and continue doing them. And that's great. I think experimentation, not only in mixed martial arts, but even in your personal life, if you're watching this, or across any spectrum, or, any situation, any whatever, is important, because that's how you find out, what's good and what's not good, So, and that's how you improve, you improve by trying things. And I think that's very important. And that's something that Bellator does. So I think at the beginning when Scott Coker took over, they were interested in the name values. Okay, let's rival the UFC on that aspect. Like, we can have big fights too. So that's when you saw, the Kimbo Slice, Frank Shamrock, Royce Gracie. I remember they brought in, what was his name? The other Gracie from Metamoris. Halleck Gracie. Like, that was a terrible fight. But again, just a big name. Who else? So many, right? So many guys. Josh Koscheck, right? I mean, you just go down the line. So many guys that probably shouldn't be fighting, but they had that name value. And nowadays, they got some pretty good prospects. They got some pretty good native talent as well. And they don't want to be seen with that look anymore. They want to start rivaling the UFC in other perspectives, which is depth, talent, and homegrown fighters. You know what I'm saying? And I respect that, and certainly I think that's a good move on their part. But within that process, because they did take a lot of hate from some of the bookings that they did in previous years, I think they just went a little bit too far with it. Like, no, if they're somewhat old and, UFC staple, like, we're not interested in that. We're only taking, prime fighters. Like, that, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about things. I think, there's a lot of gain you can make by taking in fighters that are former UFC fighters that might be in their older stages, but still have a lot left in the tank. Yoel Romero obviously being one of them. I think what happened here was they kind of said that because they're setting a precedent. Like, hey, look, we're not about this business anymore. And I think that's good. But I also think there was a big push in the fan base and in media especially about how good a signing from Yoel Romero would be. And it was relatively a positive outlook, right? Like, they didn't want to be the type of promotion that signs a fighter and everyone just like kind of just slaps their face like, oh God, here we go again. Like, typical. No. All in all, like, the free agency of Yoel Romero was seen very, very positive. Like, dude, this is a huge asset to any promotion. And hell yeah, we're going to be covering this fighter wherever he goes. And, I think once Bellator was able to see sort of that feedback, I'm not saying that was extremely, I'm not saying that was the deciding factor, but it certainly helped. Like, okay, like, in many people's eyes, this guy's still a top middleweight. So we're not picking somebody from, way past their prime. He's still a very game opponent. He clearly has a big fan base because people care. And, the media care as well. So let's do it. But, to your point, we don't know what goes backstage. So it could have been a negotiation tactic as well to maybe, bulge and get some things that they wanted to get on their contract with Romero. That's certainly possible. But I think a big one was that sort of the positive reaction that the UFC, that Bellator got as far as, a potential Yoel Romero signing, right? I think if Anderson Silva were to sign with Bellator, I think some people would be excited, but I also think a lot of people would see that negatively and kind of be like, all right, like, classic Bellator, whatever they want to say. But yeah, I think it was a mixture of things. Certainly, probably some things in the back went down, but I think overall the positivity that surrounded Yoel Romero's free agency, and not only that, but the attention that it got was a deciding factor there. Biggest threat for Yoel, the Seaside wants to know. So he's fighting at 205, right? I know. I feel like the people that watch these live Q&As that I do are pretty smart with the type of questions that you guys ask and the conversations that I've had with you guys on Twitter. So I know you guys might be on the same boat with me on this take that I'm about to have. But Vadim Nemkov, man, I got my eye on that dude. I really do think, I have a suspicion. He might, I'm not saying he's the best light heavyweight on the planet. That is John Jones, by far. But he might be up there. He really might. I mean, the guy's just 28 years old. He was born in 92, just like myself. And he defeated Ryan Bader pretty convincingly. He's a freak athlete, extremely strong, has good striking, packs a lot of power, very, very good wrestling, good positions, and on top of that, submissions. He's a complete package. Now, again, he's fairly untested, right? Again, he's very new to MMA. Not very new, but I believe he's got maybe less than 15 fights into his career. Let me see. But time will tell. But I wouldn't be surprised if Vadim Nemkov ends up becoming, regardless of division, a top 2, top 3, like up there. Like, I would not be surprised. I mean, he defeated Liam McGeary, stopped him. Defeated Phil Davis, Rafael Carvalho, Ryan Bader, all former champs. That's big, you know, and guys that were proven in the UFC as well. You know, Ryan Bader easily today. He's a top 10 light heavyweight, maybe top 5 heavyweight. Easily, I think a top 10 as well. Certainly a top 15. So he's beating solid guys. I think it's gonna get interesting once he faces like Rumble, maybe Romero, and other guys. But I think, as far as threat, maybe Vadim Nemkov could be the biggest threat for Romero, because if you look at an Anthony Johnson fight, like, Anthony Johnson fights pretty wild, but Romero has never been stopped. He has a great chin, so can Anthony Johnson stop him? Maybe, but within that wildness, can Romero catch him? Possibly. But with Vadim Nemkov, can Romero out wrestle him? I don't think so. Can Vadim Nemkov out-wrestle Romero? Maybe. Striking? I don't know. I think it's very interesting. But at 205, I think, first I have to see how he looks at 205. I think obviously he's going to give up some size advantage that he had at 185. But my guess is that Rumble would be interesting. He's got good wrestling defense, very good power, good striking as well. Vadim Nemkov just seems a little bit more polished. So, I don't know. Time will tell. We'll see how he gets matched up. But certainly, I think it's got to be between Rumble and probably Nemkov, to be honest. I think so. I think Yoel Romero is actually a pretty bad matchup for Corey Anderson. I think Yoel Romero, that's actually a good fight for him, to be honest. All right, I believe this is the last question. Yes, sir. And then we move on over to the YouTube portion of this program. So again, if you got questions you didn't get to submit on Twitter, throw them on the YouTube live chat and I'll get to them, all right? I see that some are already in there, so I'll get to those. But again, if you're just listening out, throw them in the YouTube live chat and we'll be chatting pretty soon, all right? So the Executioner 91 wants to know, why are UFC fighters and fans getting pissed at Jake Paul? Isn't that exactly what Paul is hoping for? Yes. It's 101. Pro wrestling and promotion 101. It don't matter if they love you or hate you. What matters is that, you know, they feel strongly about you either way. And that's exactly what Jake Paul is doing. Look, I was speaking to Artem Lov in Spanish last week, and I was asking him about this YouTube boxing. Again, Artem is a fighter for sure. I'm not saying he's a YouTuber. For sure he's a fighter. Very, very he's a fighter's fighter. You know, I know he gets some hate, but I really like Artem. He's a great guy. First of all, if you chat with him, super cool dude. Always very generous with his time. Very, very nice guy. Artem is great, and on top of that, you know, he's got skills. He's got fighting skills. Very, very tough dude. Very durable as well. He'll fight anybody, anywhere, any given time. But obviously, you know, he has big star power, and we've seen him in this sort of not freak matchups, but maybe super fights. I don't even know what's the name, but like, what would you call a Paul Malignaggi fight? Like, yeah, these big hype fights. Let's just say that big hype fights. He's been in those, right? So I kind of just wanted to get his take on Jake Paul, and he's like, look, I mean, they're making money. I don't hate it. And if they give me that fight, dude, I'm down to get cash in a fat paycheck. So I'll scrap the dude. I don't care. And look, he said, you know, he's not the greatest fighter ever, but like, if you don't like that, then don't watch it. It's as simple as that. If you don't like it, then don't watch it. Like, if you don't like sushi, don't eat it. But MMA fans are like, oh, I hate sushi. This is disgusting. Like, bro, block Jake Paul. Block. You know, there's like a Twitter thing where you can block certain names if you don't want to say, like, if you don't want any UFC 256 results, but you still want to scroll through Twitter because you don't want any spoilers, you can block that out. Do the same thing with Jake Paul. If he has a pay-per-view against Mayweather, or his brother has, or he fights McGregor or whoever he ends up fighting, just don't pay money to watch it. And don't watch it. Like, nobody's forcing you. But again, people love this. People love to hate. And low-key, like deep down, they say like, oh, this is the worst thing for MMA. This is the worst thing, period. But low-key, deep down inside, they fuck with it. And they're about it. They're just lying to themselves. Because if you really weren't interested, you wouldn't pay much attention to it. So, I think there's a simple solution if you're not about it and if you don't want to support that kind of thing. Don't watch it. Don't tweet about it. It's as simple as that. But a lot of fighters as well, and I've seen this, I'm not going to call out any names. A lot of fighters, go and critique it and, try to say something about it, but at the same time, that's kind of the role they want to play, but they also want to attach their name to that because it gets big retweets, it gets big attention, etc., etc., etc. Boosts their profile, whatever the case might be. But I guarantee you, every single fighter on the UFC roster, Bellator roster, except maybe some top ones, maybe not. Maybe like a Conor McGregor, like the really, really big stars. But if they give them $50 million and they get the green light from whatever promotion they fight in to go box Jake Paul, they'll do it. They'd knock his ass out in the first round, get 50 mil, and dip. They'd do it. But, again, people love to hate. All right, so that's it for the Twitter questions. Thank you so much for everybody that submitted Twitter stuff. Remember, please give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you haven't already, forgot to say, but the super chat is open as well. If you want to donate and support this channel, help it continue to grow, you can do that monetarily as well, but you don't have to. Just your like and subscribe and your comments and your participation and your views is enough. So anyways, let's get to the YouTube portion of this program, shall we? We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'll try to answer as many as I can. After Oliveira's win over Ferguson, I really want to see Oliveira versus Ryan Hall now. I know they're in different weight classes, but how would you see that one going? I think Oliveira would beat his ass. And I like Ryan Hall. I'm not trying to disrespect him. I'm just talking street right now, homie. But yeah, I think he'd beat him. Ryan Hall, he could maybe pull off not engaging in jiu-jitsu if fighters, are avoiding his takedowns by, again, having those rolls to knee locks and heel hooks that he has, right? So, that keeps a certain distance, and then he throws that high kick, and he can actually be very rangy, even though he might not have the best striking. He can be a very, very effective rangy striker. We saw it against, who was it? Gray Maynard, right? Who he couldn't close the distance because he didn't want to get submitted, but at the same time, he threw that high kick and he had a few threats on the feet, right? But when it comes down to Charles Oliveira, dude, Charles Oliveira, because he's in a different weight class and he's so much bigger, Like, he can't do that. Like, he can't keep that range with him. So Charles Oliveira is like, okay, like, I'm not gonna let you try to take me down. I'm gonna avoid the submission and keep a certain amount of distance. But at the same time, I'm long enough to like kick the shit out of your legs, do head kicks, do the jab, etc., etc. And if it comes to the ground, I still have a feeling that Ryan Hall is better than Oliveira, but given the size and also the skills that Oliveira has, because he's a very, very solid black belt, he would have enough tools to maybe not sub Hall, but at least avoid his submissions. I think so. So I think Oliveira would beat him. I think the interesting ones, if you're doing crossovers, would be something like a Makhachev, Ryan Hall. That'd be kind of interesting. Greg Gillespie, Ryan Hall. That'd be interesting. Shit, Kevin Lee, Ryan Hall. That'd be interesting. Give him like a wrestling. Somebody that can scramble. And then you got somebody fighting for dominant position and Ryan Hall fighting for, sneaky submissions, fishing for those scrambles. That's always fun. But other than that, I think Ryan Hall should just stick to 145. A guy that I'd love to see fight more often, but a lot of fighters don't want to fight him. But yeah, there's tons of fun matchups. But he's someone people want to avoid. Just tough fighter to prepare for. Is it just me, or did Charles look stronger than Tony? He picked him up and basically dominated him. Storm 50-71-7-21 wants to know. That's what technique does. I remember when, and again, I'm not comparing myself to Oliveira. I'm nowhere near close. But when I started, training in jiu-jitsu, I had a wrestling base. I had wrestled in high school prior to that. And I went up against some guys that were smaller than me and were throwing me around and were putting me in very dominant positions and holding me down. And you're like, what is happening? Like, and that's what good technique does. And, vice versa. There's guys that I've faced that are much stronger and bigger than me. And, I've been able to hold them down and throw them around. And that's what technique does. If you have all the strength in the world, but you don't know where to apply it or how to apply it, it's almost useless. Sometimes even that strength that makes the other person stronger. There's a few positions in jiu-jitsu that do that. That if you put in your full strength, like it actually, backfires. I'm trying to think like specific situations that would be the case. Like for example, like I'll give you an example. If you mount somebody and you like put all your weight and you like try to be as strong as possible and try to like push down on somebody as much as possible with your hips, right? Being as really what would be common sense to the average person, right? Like drive your force towards someone to hold them down, right? In between the floor and yourself. That actually many times helps the person that's on bottom because it gives them a solid, strong base because it's a strong object, basically unmovable object to push from. So you can actually get away a lot more. Whereas you loosen your hips, and when somebody tries to explode and push you, and you loosen up on the strength, all of a sudden, there's less to push on, right? There's less resistance. So it's a lot tougher. And there's many situations like that in jiu-jitsu where you see that you actually have to decrease the amount of strength to be stronger in that position. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what beautiful technique does. And clearly Charles Oliveira, a very technical fighter, but I'm sure he's also strong. He's in his 30s now. He ain't 21 anymore, so he's definitely got that man strength now. But yeah, that was all technique. Charles Oliveira out-grappled Tony Ferguson. He didn't out-condition him or out-muscled him because he was younger. He out-grappled him. That's the truth. Let's see here. Immigrant mentality Stiopic. Rumbo Johnson, Yoel Romero, Phil Davis, Corey Anderson, Ryan Bader, Vadim Nemkov. Who has the better 205 division, UFC or Bellator? I actually wrote an opinion column on MMA Junkie yesterday about this very situation. So all in all, the UFC has the best division in the sense that the UFC actually has a top 15. And beyond that, like the UFC has a lot of fighters at 205, Bellator, not so many. The UFC's 205 division is much, much deeper. And also, depending on the status, I think this is a deciding factor. What John Jones is going to do. If John Jones goes back down to, and doesn't even go back down because he hasn't gone up to heavyweight officially, but I guess if John Jones returns to 205, just by having the 205 GOAT, you have the best division, period. Like, he's the biggest star at 205. He's one of the biggest stars in the sport. And from a technique standpoint and history standpoint, I would say the most important figure in the history of 205 pounds. So, and the best fighter. So by far, UFC has the best division in that sense. But because John Jones is out of the picture, I would still say slightly the UFC has the best division just because it's so much more deeper. But at the same time, if you're just comparing the top five, Bellator's top five rivals the UFC's. A lot of the guys at 205 in the top could beat the UFC guys and vice versa. I think it'd be very, very, very even. And then as far as star power, dude, Anthony Johnson, I think he's a bigger star than Dominic Reyes. I think he's a bigger star than probably Jan Blachowicz, and Alexander Rakic. Same thing with Yoel Romero. I mean, maybe even Ryan Bader, you can say the same thing. So Bellator might even have more star power at 205 than the UFC. Obviously not counting John Jones, which is pretty crazy to say. And these are not just guys like, say, like an Anderson Silva, Royce Gracie, right? Like you can count that as star power. No, these are guys that are still relevant in the weight class and have skills and have a lot left to give. So in my opinion, top five, Bellator's for sure rivals the UFC's, and it's competitive. And that's something you were never able to say in the past before. You could say that maybe comparing champions, like, oh, who would win? Kamaru Usman and Douglas Lima, right? Like that's been a question. Where at 145, Patricio Pitbull versus Volkanovski, okay, that's always been a conversation. But as far as like depth, the UFC has always destroyed Bellator. But in this case, Bellator is now has a claim that they never had it before. Corey Anderson is a top light heavyweight, whether you like it or not, because a lot of people hate on him. Anthony Johnson hasn't fought in 3 years, but I suspect he's still a top light heavyweight. Yoel Romero, I think he's a top light heavyweight, again, with his work that he's done at 185. Ryan Bader, certainly a top light heavyweight. Vadim Nemkov, certainly a top light heavyweight. So for the first time in some time, Bellator can say that their top five rivals the UFC's, and they might even have the biggest star power at 205 pounds, period. Not counting John Jones. That's pretty crazy. So anyways, I go more in depth about this question on my opinion piece over at MMAJunkie.com, so check that over. It's probably bumped out now because obviously a lot of news has happened since. But if you can go to my Twitter at Danny Segura TV, it's up there as well. But certainly give that a read. I go more in detail about that question. All right, we got about 7 minutes left, so I'll try to get as many questions as I can in these 7 minutes remaining on the chat. Following losses from Dos Santos, Souza this weekend, and the UFC matchmaking cuts, do you think they will be on the chopping board? Also, have you heard of any other names that might be in consideration? So I haven't, but certainly, if they're letting guys go like Yoel Romero, you gotta be a little bit on your toes, a little bit. Because, and I wrote another opinion piece on MMA Junkie about this. Again, go check that out. And I'll just mention the last piece that I wrote. And I said the UFC is no longer interested in having all the best fighters. They're just interested in having the very best, and those who promise to be that. That was my final quote where I finished the article. So if you're not the very best, so if you're not a Dustin Poirier, if you're not a Conor McGregor, if you're not a Charles Oliveira, if you're not a Justin Gaethje, but you're also not who's a prospect at 155. If you're not doing this in your career, and you've been around and you have an expensive contract, and you're not a huge star, as far as the casual goes, I think you should start not worrying, but I think it'd be fair to say that maybe you'd be in consideration. Say like a Jussier Formiga. Yeah, he's 35, but Jussier Formiga easily to today, he is one of the top flyweights in the world, top 5, easy. Jussier Formiga, they cut him, and he was just coming off a loss to Alex Perez, who recently fought for the belt. So it's not like he was on a terrible losing streak, losing to nobody. No, that guy is a top flyweight today. Normally, a few years back, the UFC would be interested in having him just because he's top in the world. That was kind of the UFC motto, but it just doesn't seem from what I've been seeing with the cuts. Again, I could be wrong when these cuts roll out, in the next few weeks, right? Because we're getting pretty close to the end of 2020. I could be wrong, and maybe it's a bunch of guys that are on losing streaks and that are at the bottom of their weight classes. Maybe, but given everything that I've seen with letting Werdum walk away, right? Another top heavyweight today, Yoel Romero. Anthony Rumble Johnson, it seemed that's not what they wanted, but it seemed that's what happened. So that's maybe an interesting case there. But Corey Anderson, you can't make a case that Corey Anderson is not a top light heavyweight. He clearly is. And a few other names, right? Jussier Formiga, as I just mentioned. It seems to me that that's kind of the direction that they're going to. And I'm not blaming them. Look, they're way smarter than me. I'm sure they've put a lot more thought into this than I have. So there's a reason for that, and they're looking out for the future. And I also took a look at Dana White Contender Series signings. Out of the 37 fighters that they signed in Season 4 alone, right? Only 6 of them were older than 30 out of 37. And the average age was 27. And that's keeping in mind that they did sign a 37-year-old former boxer, right? Some lady, I forget the name. So that spiked up the average that I had to compute there. So, the medium is obviously much lower, probably around like 24, 23. So that's really what they're getting at. So to answer your question, Dave Lackers, Dos Santos and Souza could be names that they let go. Obviously I would say Dos Santos has headlined many pay-per-views. He's a bit of a star. He's a staple. That's someone you can put on a pay-per-view and beefs it up as far as name value. He's also weird because he's a guy that like his chin's not there, and that's really what's been causing his defeats. But his style is there. Like his style is not an outdated style. His style is very much relevant to today's MMA. He hits still very, very hard. He's still very, very fast. I would say he's one of the fastest heavyweights today. And he fights very smart, and he's got a ton of experience. But again, at heavyweight, if you don't have a good chin, you just can't get that far. You can afford not having a great chin at 125, 135, 145, 155, maybe 170. But once you start getting to 185, 205 in heavyweight, especially heavyweight, to become an elite and a champion, it's got to be, physical as well. You got to have a good chin. It's just a requirement in those weight classes because any jab is a hard punch. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, yes, I think they could potentially be on the chopping block. And no, I haven't heard of any other names that could potentially be let go. We'll see. We'll find out in the next few months. But they signed a lot of young guys from the Contender Series. And that seems to me that they don't want the older guys, right? If you're just signing a bunch of young guys and they have to let go because they don't have enough fights throughout the year to cater for everyone. So I suspect we're going to see some of the bigger names, more of the veterans that are past their prime, be let go. That's my hunch. Again, I go more in depth on this in my opinion column on MMAJunkie.com. Go check that out as well. Do you like your chances against Chase Hooper? No, I don't like my chances against any professional MMA fighter, any amateur fighter, dude. I'd get fucked up. Actually, no, I take that back. Maybe CM Punk, maybe. In like a jiu-jitsu match, maybe CM Punk. Fighting wise, he is bigger than me. He might beat my ass. But jiu-jitsu, yeah, I'd take him. I've grappled with like professional fighters, maybe not famous ones, but like that are like brown belts in jiu-jitsu, and I've got my ass whooped. But there's a conversation there, Yeah, I get some good positions, shit like that. I'm not bad. But I'm out of shape now. Extremely out of shape. Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. Will it happen? Who wins? I don't know if it will. Eventually it will. They always give in at some point, even if it's 5 years too late. And who wins? I think depending at what stage, right? I think Joshua has a little bit more life in his career, whereas Tyson Fury is maybe might not be in his prime for as long as Anthony Joshua. So it depends on the timing. If it's 5 years from now, probably Anthony Joshua. But today, I think Tyson Fury beats Anthony Joshua. I think so. Darby Crash donated to the Super Chat. Shouts out. Thank you very much. Ilima Lay said she had a loss. Wait, what? Ilima Lay says she had a loss speech prepared in bizarre pre-fight interview. In her post-fight speech, said it was a relief to lose. Thoughts on her and the new champ Velasquez. So yeah, that was actually, and I'm glad you brought it up, Darby Crash. I should be paying you, bro. Yeah, great question. And that was actually one of the most bizarre things that I saw last week in mixed martial arts. That was weird. I encourage you to go to, after this is over, go to MMA Junkie's YouTube channel. We've been killing it. Shouts out to my colleague, Nolan King. We've been killing it with the Bellator coverage because we actually have someone in the sphere, in the bubble, interview them pre and post in person. So shouts out to Nolan. And yeah, he was there and he shot the scrum with Lima, with like the post-fight conference interview with all the reporters. And that was like a super bizarre post-fight interview. Like, she lost her undefeated record. She's 10-1 now. She lost her title. And like, she was happy. She said she cried because of happiness. And like, it's one thing saying it, it'll be like, I'm happy, and like, you know, it's like the meme with the mask, but like meanwhile you're like tearing up inside and you look sad. Like, we've seen that a lot too in MMA. But like, she looked genuinely happy. Like, when she said she looked relieved, like, she was relieved, like, she looked relieved. Like, that was so weird. And it's weird because it's like, she's a new champion. Like, it's different, like, hearing like GSP, right? Like, he was a champion for years and also like a huge superstar. So I understand that pressure. Same thing with Anderson Silva. He was pretty relieved of losing his title. Like, again, it was Anderson Silva, the biggest star in the sport. So many title defenses. But Ilima, like, no offense, but, you know, I mean, she's obviously like a big name in Bellator, and we're talking about her right now. Like, people care about her, certainly. But she didn't have that type of pressure, that GSP pressure, that Anderson Silva pressure. And also, like, how many title defenses did she have? Let me pull it up. Let me like 3. She didn't have many. Let's see. She also hadn't fought in a while too, so it's not like Bellator's constantly trying to get her to defend her belt. You know, she has 1, 2, 3, 4 defenses. I was right. So yeah, that was bizarre. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. You know, I'm not a fighter. I'm certainly not a Ilima because everyone's different. Maybe it was getting to her. I don't know, but I think there's certainly something to knowing that you're not invincible. And there's certainly something about being reminded of your mortality. And there's certainly something about experiencing that and then, you know, continuing your MMA journey. There's definitely something about that. Like, you look at Justin Gaethje, like, he was like, yo, like, when I wanted to get knocked out. Like, I kind of, like, because at the end of the day, you kind of want to see what's your limit. You know what I'm saying? Like, you kind of want to see where the line is for you, right? If you never find out, like, you always have this doubt, like, what is it what's going to take for me to cave in? What's going to take for me to lose? Like, what are my holes? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, once you experience something like that, then, you know, you're able to, it's a lot easier to like keep building, in my opinion. It happens, for example, I actually think that this happened to Tony Ferguson. Obviously, a lot of factors that went into the loss with Gaethje. You can say age, matchup, that second weight cut, the style change from fighting Khabib to Gaethje. But I think there's also something to like, dude, I just keep winning, and I can't lose. Like, eventually, like, what, like, think about it. Like, what do you work on? Like, you go back for another training camp after your 12th consecutive victory. What do you work on? Your jiu-jitsu's been sick. Your striking's been sick. What do you work on? Like, how do you evolve? Like, you just keep doing the same shit over and over. Like, how do you evolve? Maybe you can bring in different people to like show you new stuff, but it's a lot tougher when like everything is perfect. Now, if you go in there and you go, shit, like I certainly had a difficulty with southpaws, or I really had a tough time with a stubborn wrestler, or shit, I really had a tough time in half guard and I lost via decision because somebody just sat in my half guard and I couldn't get out. Then it's a lot easier to go back to the drawing board and evolve as a mixed martial artist. And to at some point, if you go on a crazy win streak, that has to mess with your head a little bit. It does in some sort of way. That's why it's so impressive seeing like a GSP or like a Khabib like still manage to be great and still manage to improve time after time after time, even if victorious against everyone, especially in a very dominant fashion. So great question, Darby Crash. Again, I encourage everybody to check out that Elimale scrum because it was certainly interesting. And I actually think this is going to be good for her career. I think we're going to see a much better fighter next time out. Like, I really do think she needed this, you know, and she even admits this is what I needed. So very interesting stuff. And as far as what do I think about the new champion, Juliana Velasquez, I think she's tough as shit. Very good judo, obviously. That's her background. Hits hard, very composed. You know, she's only like, 8-0 or something like that, but fights very composed. That fight with Lima was a little boring, but her striking's good. I think she needs some groundwork, and that was exposed against Lima in the 4th round. But again, this is just a fighter that has less than 10 professional fights in her career, so a work in progress. But I think she's great. And look, this is good. We're going to get a potential nice little grudge match, rematch. If Lima wins, then potentially trilogy. This just adds layers to Bellator's women's flyweight division. Also, like Juliana Velasquez, striker, versus Colombia's Alejandra Lara, who's a fantastic striker. That'd be fun. I mean, it just opens new matchups as well. I think all in all, this is actually a good move, you know? All right, I'm tired of talking. I am an hour deep into this thing. I appreciate everybody that submitted questions. If I didn't get to some of your questions, if they're still relevant a week from now. All right, somebody asking me about my Jeep. Cool. I've been kind of annoying, maybe like posting too much about it on Instagram, but ask me next week, Max Garcia, about my Jeep XJ, beautiful vehicle. If you haven't checked it out, head over to my Instagram, Danny Segura TV. Check that out. Badass truck. I'm ready for the apocalypse, let's just say, at least on that area. But yes, if you still there's some questions that I didn't get to, you can throw them on next week's live Q&A. Sounds good. Other than that, I appreciate everybody that watched this. I appreciate everybody that gave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, donated to the super chat. So thank you very much. Stay safe this weekend. Wash your hands, wear masks, enjoy the fights this weekend. And we'll talk next Tuesday. Later.